This
and white
conference
writing.
will now be recorded.
I'll just start that again. This next slide has a black background with blue and white writing. I am presenting this webinar from Wollongong, New South Wales, which is the land of the Wadi Wadi people of the Dharawal Nation. Create New South Wales acknowledges the Aboriginal people across the state and their continued connection to their lands, waters and culture. We respect elders past and present and the role that Aboriginal artists play in contributing to their culture. Please feel free to share with us which lands you're currently representing here at today's webinar. Next slide, please. On this slide, there is a dark grey background with the words Liz Martin and Arts Development and Training Manager in white writing. In the top right-hand corner is the Accessible Arts logo. This is in a circle that has a pink background with white writing. The logo includes a white lowercase a resting on a white table shape above the words Accessible Arts in white, which sit above the word Arts, followed by a plus sign, followed by the word Disability. Create New South Wales works closely with Accessible Arts to provide support to the sector. So I would like to introduce Liz Martin, Arts Development and Training Manager at Accessible Arts, to tell you a little bit more about this. Over to you, Liz.
Thanks, Anne-Louise. Hi, everybody. Lovely well, I can't really see you all, but it's lovely to be here with you all this morning. I'm dialing in from Gadigal land of the people of the Aurora Nation here in, Newtown in Sydney, otherwise known as Newtown. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. For those of you that don't know Accessible Arts, we are the peak arts and disability organisation for New South Wales. We work with professional artists, so artists who are emerging mid-career and who have established themselves within the arts within New South Wales, who are deaf or disabled. We do all sorts of things from training to consulting, and if you haven't come across us before, check us out on our website, which is arts.net.au. If we haven't spoken before, feel free to reach out and say hello. Get in contact via email is probably the best. You can find our info email on our website. Or you can email me directly at lmartin@arts.net.au. We do offer funding occasionally and some residencies as well that you might be interested in applying for. We have just announced a new residency with Sydney Olympic Park that's gone up as of yesterday. You'll find it on our website. So feel free to check that out. I say this because connecting in with Accessible Arts and doing a residency or having some sort of funding experience under your belt before you go to Create New South Wales can actually help and make your application stronger. But we can also help you in other ways with your applications to Create New South Wales. Sometimes it's good to talk through your idea with someone else. Just to have another pair of ears to listen to what you're thinking, someone to wrap the idea through with, and more than happy to be that person for you if you'd like to get in contact. Also, while you're writing the application, sometimes it's really great to have another person read over it and give you some feedback. And I'm also really happy to help you by doing that. And then lastly, before you submit and you've got your ideas really worked out and most of your text settled upon and you know what you're aiming to do, you might be looking for some support material. And Accessible Arts does write support letters for artists that we know and are connected with, and we know their work, and we have an idea of the project that you're applying for. So you can reach out to us for that kind of support as well. So support letters as well. So then the main things that we can help you with in terms of grant applications. And we are pretty super friendly Small team, but very friendly and open team. So if you ever want to get in contact with us, just give us a bell. I think that covers it all off, and I hope to hear from you soon. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks so much, Liz. That's a great encapsulation of the support provided by Accessible Arts for you for putting your funding applications in, and we'll talk a bit more about that at the end of the webinar as well. So we'll just go to the next slide, please, Kartika. So for the remainder of the presentation, all slides will have a white background with black text and a dark blue banner running along the bottom of the slide. The dark blue banner has the heading of each slide in light blue and white writing. The heading of this slide is Overview. So during this webinar, we'll be providing an overview of the following topics relating to the Create New South Wales Arts and Cultural Funding Program. Firstly, we'll look at some accessibility, then funding available for individual and group applicants, who can apply, what you can apply for, what is the assessment criteria you need to address in your applications, how to apply, help guides and other support, and then at the end of the presentation, we will have an opportunity for you to ask questions. And as already mentioned, if you have any questions as we go along, please add them to the chat function and we'll come back to them at the end. Next slide, please, Kartika. So the heading of this slide is accessibility. We provide the guidelines for the applications, or for the funding program, sorry, in the following formats, both PDF reader version and Word versions. On the application forms themselves, there is also an option to provide video responses for all small project applications and for individual and group applications to both project and creative query programs that are requesting $20,000 or less. So if you're asking for $20,000 or less through those funding rounds, you can submit video responses. There is also a Submit Video Response webinar taking place this Thursday at 2 o'clock if you want to find out more about that. If you require the guidelines and or the application form in a format which is accessible to you, or if you require this information in another language, you can contact us between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Monday to Friday on 02 8289 6520 or on our email, which is arts.funding@create.nsw.gov.au. There is also the option to access the Access Hub and the National Relay Service, and that information is on our website. Next slide, please, Kartika. The heading of this slide is Funding Available. This project is currently this webinar is currently looking at opportunities for individuals and groups only. So we'll be talking about the small project grants and the project and creative query funding round, which is currently open. Next slide, please. Who can apply? So for both the small project grants and for projects and creative query, you must be an Australian citizen or have an Australian permanent residency status. You can be a group located in Australia with Australian citizenship and or permanent resident members. And you must be a current resident of New South Wales. You also must be a professional artist or arts and cultural worker, and this includes museum workers. If you're applying for creative query projects, you must be a New South Wales Aboriginal artist or arts and cultural worker. Next slide, please. So firstly, we're just going to talk about small project grants. So this is an opportunity that's open to you all year round. You can apply for funding of between $500 and $5,000. There are sort of some timeframes related to small project grants in that your project that you're applying for must be urgent or time sensitive. So you must need the money that you're requesting within 3 months of applying for this opportunity. And the beauty of this application is that you only need to provide a breakdown of your expenditure, of how you're going to spend the money that you're requesting from Create New South Wales. You don't need to provide a budget. So it's a kind of simpler application. You can also provide video responses to this on this application form. So you can choose between writing text, as you would be normally expected to do, or you can submit a video response. These applications are also assessed internally, and this helps us provide a quick response to your application. So we aim to get a notification out to you within 3 weeks of your submitting your application. Next slide, please. So the purpose of these webinars really is to sort of give you a whole heap of information about the funding rounds that have just opened. Round 1 for both individual projects and for Creative Courier opened a week or so ago. And this round will close on Wednesday, the 18th of August. Outcomes will be announced in early November. So these are for projects that are sort of starting from December onwards. Round 2 will open on the 6th of December this year and will close on the 31st of January next year. So if you don't feel that you have a project ready to go this time around, 6th of December will be fast upon us, so just maybe prepare yourself for that round 2 opportunity. For both project and Creative Courier funding, you can apply up to $60,000. So there's a cap on actually how much you can apply for. Next slide, please, Kartika. So what can you apply for through these rounds? So your project must be a clearly defined arts and cultural activity. With the exception of screen or filmmaking. We do not fund screen or filmmaking projects. They are ineligible through this funding round. You can apply for the creation, development and or presentation of new work. Any of those stages, a combination of those stages, it's up to you where you're at with your project. The funding that you're applying for could be used for artist fees. Oh, I'm breaking up. I do apologise. I'll just repeat this slide. Is that right, Raymond? And I'll try and keep my microphone close to me. So I'll just repeat this slide. This is what you can apply for through these funding rounds. Your project must be a clearly defined arts and cultural activity. Can I just get a response from anybody else who's struggling to hear me?
Here from this end.
I'm hearing you perfectly.
Oh, okay. Thank you. All right, so just going back to here, your project must be a clearly defined arts and cultural activity, and you can apply for the creation, development and or presentation of new work. So basically you can apply for whatever stage you're at in the development of your project or your work. The funding that you apply for can be for artist fees, project materials, venue and equipment hire, your marketing costs, a range of things related to that project. And as discussed before, screen or filmmaking projects are ineligible. Next slide, please. So when you're making your application, there are 3 main assessment criteria: merit, impact, and viability. So they all demand different responses from you. So we're going to take them one at a time. So the next slide, please, is looking at merit. So merit is where you, in the application, you want to present your project pitch and speak to the quality of the work you're developing or presenting. How you do this can include, talking about the timeliness of the project, the uniqueness of your project, the experience of your artists, creatives, and arts and cultural workers. So basically, this is your opportunity to be to get us excited about, to get the artform boards excited about what you're wanting to do. Next slide, please. So the second main assessment criteria is impact. So this is where you explain why your project matters and who will benefit from it. So just going back to small project grants, you have to demonstrate in the impact section, you have to demonstrate how the project impacts on your career and practice and why the timeliness of the project is important. For project and creative project funding, you need to choose one of the following criteria to demonstrate the impact or reach of your project. So you either choose audience or art form. So when you're talking to audience, you want to talk about who your audience is, what you will do to increase, improve, and or change their participation. So audiences include stakeholders, community members, participants, and key people in the sector. If you choose artform, you want to talk about how your project will or your program will innovate or expand access to or advance your chosen art form. So they're two quite different impacts which have their own kind of things that you need to address. Next slide, please. The final assessment criteria is viability. This is where you must demonstrate your ability to manage a budget with New South Wales state funding and how you're going to achieve your objectives. So this is where you need to get very clear what your income and your expenses are going to be. Also, how much confirmed income you have. Create New South Wales will prefer you to have more than, Create New South Wales as a form of income. You want to be looking at other sources of income for your project. There will also be a question there about what you'll do if you're unsuccessful in this application. Where will your project be without this funding? What are the risks associated with this project? And how do you intend to reduce these risks? I'm happy to talk about at the end, like if you have any questions related to what is currently the major risk at the moment, which is COVID lockdowns and restrictions. So we can talk about that in Q&A if anyone has any questions about that. Also in the viability, sorry, it's not on the slide there, but we also request a sort of a project plan or what your project is going to look like and some information about sort of key milestones for your project as well. Next slide, please. So the next, I think one of the biggest things in an application that people often struggle with or find the hardest is getting the budget right. And we are actually running a specific budget webinar this Thursday as well, and I recommend attending that if you have any questions about doing a budget. As already discussed, the maximum amount of funding that you can apply for from Create is $60,000, and a project is considered more viable when you have sourced multiple sources of income. Through the project and Creative Koori project funding rounds, you also must contribute either cash or in-kind support towards your project. So there needs to be a contribution according to what you're requesting, a certain percentage of contribution to your project that you're making yourself. Cash contributions must be from a diversity of sources and must not solely be from the New South Wales Government agency funding. And yes, the contribution required depends on your funding request amount. Next slide, please. Another key element of an application which also requires a lot of pre-planning is support material. Support material should be exactly that. It should support and provide evidence of your project as outlined in your application. This can include samples of your work, so any samples of previous work that you might have done or work that has been done to date on the project itself. You can provide these samples as links to YouTube or Vimeo files or as uploaded documents. If you have a writing project, for instance, you want to provide some writing samples or images as well. And websites too. Your website is also a good example of your work if you upload your projects to a website. The application will also ask you for your biography or CV. This is a brief biography or CV for all artists or key collaborators on the project. And the big one, which again I think often catches people out, is letters of support. Because often these are left to the last minute. These are things that you want to get sorted early rather than later. It's mandatory to submit letters of support or formal emails or confirmation letters. If you're, to say you've been programmed in a festival or you've been invited to a conference or anything like that, you kind of want to be able to provide the confirmation of that invitation or that programming. So any letters from supporters and or collaborators as part of your application are important. They're particularly important if your project involves Aboriginal cultural elements, community or heritage. Next slide, please. Oops, sorry, I just lost my screen. Okay, so the important thing in terms of applying is the application form itself. So where you will find this application form is that you need to go to the Create New South Wales website. And if you haven't been to the Create New South Wales website before, it's www.create.nsw.gov.au. If you go to the homepage of the website, and on the bottom right-hand side of the homepage, there is a box called Quick Links. In the drop-down list below that, there is an Apply Now button or section that you can click on. Clicking on this takes you through to the Smarty Grants portal. Smarty Grants is where you can register to start an application if you haven't done this before. If you're already registered through Smarty Grants, you will just need to log in. So once you have registered and logged in, you'll be taken to a page which has the application forms for all the open funding rounds. You can then choose which form you would like to start. Once you're there, the website gives you an opportunity to preview the form or even to print it out so that you have it as a reference point. And I recommend starting your application sort of not online, maybe as a Word document, answering the questions, just sort of getting used to what you need to provide first before you start submitting it in the form. But that's up to you, actually. It's up to you how you want to do it, but sometimes that's helpful. Next slide, please. So the heading of this slide is Artform Advisory Boards. What is important about this is that when you're submitting your application, there will be a section on the form that requests you to choose which board you would like to assess your application. There are 10 boards. There's the Aboriginal Arts and Culture Board. If you're submitting an application through Creative Koori, then that is the board that will assess your application. You won't need to choose a board. But if you're if you're submitting through projects, you will need to select a board. So yes, Aboriginal Arts and Culture Board, the Classical Music, Opera and Choral Board, the Contemporary Music Board, the Dance and Physical Theatre Board, Festivals Board, Literature Board, Multi-Arts Board, Museums Board, Theatre and Musical Theatre Board, and the Visual Arts Board. And just to reiterate, if you're applying for a small project grant, that's assessed internally, so you don't need to select, or you won't be requested to select an art form board. Next slide, please. So this slide is, we start looking at the actual assessment process. So once you've completed your application and you've submitted, you will receive an email confirmation through Smarty Grants, and that will just say that your application has been received. After that, it goes through an internal eligibility check just to double check that your application is eligible. And if it is, it goes through to the assessment process. If it doesn't, if it's not eligible, you'll be informed by email, I think up to 2 weeks, within 2 weeks of applying. Eligible applications proceed to the 3-stage assessment process. Stage 1 is when the Artform Advisory Boards assess all applications, and the Artform Board members assess them independently first. On the website, you can see who are the members of those boards. So once they've all independently assessed it, stage 2 of the assessment process is that Create New South Wales provides advice to the board members on the viability section of your application. So then in stage 3, the Artform Advisory Boards meet, so all the members of the boards meet as a board and determine their final recommendations based on the individual recommendations of each board member and the viability criterion. At the end of that meeting, the recommendations or the final recommendations from the board are submitted for the consideration of the Minister for the Arts, and then he provides his approval and sign-off. And that's what then gives us the the go-ahead to then let successful and unsuccessful applicants know the outcome of the round. Next slide, please. So the heading of this slide is Making an Application Help Guide. Most of the information that we've discussed here today is also available on the website, Create New South Wales website. Just to reiterate, that website is www.create.nsw.gov.au. To access the support guides, you select the Funding and Support tab at the top of on the website, on the top banners. On the drop-down menu on the left-hand side of the Funding and Support page, you select Help for Funding Applicants. This will take you to a page with links to the following: the How to Apply guide and fact sheets, along with New South Wales Aboriginal Arts and Cultural Protocols. There are also links there to contacting staff as well for help. So all that information is on that under that Funding and Support tab. Next slide, please. There are also, as I've already sort of flagged throughout the webinar, there are some upcoming webinars to help you with your application. Tomorrow at 11 o'clock, there is an introduction to the key changes to the Arts and Cultural Funding Program and how to make an application webinar. So that will go into more detail on how to apply. So you might be interested in attending that one. On Thursday at 11 o'clock, there will be a webinar dedicated to completing a budget. And on Thursday in the afternoon at 2 o'clock, there's a webinar that will look at how to submit video responses for those applications to small project grants, or if you're submitting an application where you're requesting less than $20,000 in funding support. Go to the next slide, please, Katika. So just a little bit of, I suppose, a bit of a pep talk around the grant journey. Applying for funding is an important part of the artist's journey, or the creative life, really. So it's sort of something you need to sort of take on board as a thing you need to do, or, you know, you don't need to do it. If you want to do it, it's part of the artist's life, if you like. So it's really important when you're applying for any kind of funding opportunity, whether it's through us or through the Australia Council or through philanthropic funding or wherever you're seeking your funding, local government, that you get to know the guidelines of the funding program that you're applying to and how your project may be suitable for funding. So, and that's the thing that you can always ask us too, like if you have any queries around your project and whether it's suitable, check in with us or check in with Accessible Arts first, just to have that initial conversation. It's really important to organise any partners, collaborators and support, particularly support material, early. Sort of get all those ducks in a row, if you like, before you start filling in the application. And do not hesitate to get help. Talk to us, talk to Accessible Arts. That's what we're there for. We're not there to complete the application for you, but we're definitely there to help you. And it's really important to give yourself plenty of time. So now, as I said earlier, like if you're not feeling that you're ready this round, there's another round coming up in just a couple of months. So maybe, you know, think about how you want to timeline your work towards getting funding for your project. Next slide, please. Last advice. So just to remember that funding applications take practice. And they may take multiple attempts. It's very rare for people to submit their very first application and get it. Often there are many reasons for not getting a grant. Often it's not your application or the project itself. It could be as much as, you know, highly competitive rounds, a lot of applications to that round, not enough funding to actually give out. So all kinds of reasons, and for that reason, we always recommend that you seek feedback on any application you've put in that you weren't successful for. We run feedback sessions after every round. Another good bit of advice, which Liz also gave at the beginning, is you know, just start small. Don't maybe try for a small project grant first. Try something that you know, build your application writing muscle, if you like. So that's a good way to think about it too. And to keep creating and don't give up. it can feel demoralising if you apply for funding, you put a lot of work into an application. But if you're unsuccessful the first time round, that doesn't mean you'll be unsuccessful in other rounds. So get the feedback, talk to more people, and try again. So over to you is the next slide, please, Kartika. So now we're going to open it up to some questions from you. Yeah, so I think we were looking at maybe if you have a question that we've had some questions come through the chat, and I might just sort of ask for, I might go backwards if that's all right. I have a question here from, I'll start with you, Raymond, because you've written one just recently. Can I break down a project into multiple components for funding? For example, pre-production and post-production. Yes, you can. It's whether you want to apply for all of those elements of a project in the one application, or whether you're talking about breaking it down into separate applications. For instance, if you're going, we're in pre-production now, so I'm going to apply for funding towards pre-production. Is that your question, Raymond? Did you want to clarify? Yes, correct. Okay, so Raymond is saying that is correct. So breaking your project down into, I suppose, workable components is really good, and looking at it as a process of like each stage, achieving each stage of your project towards the sort of final outcome, which might be presentation or publication or exhibition or whatever it might be. It's always good to look at a project in its component parts. So a question from Liz about different application formats. What different application formats will you accept? Video, handwritten, Word doc. We accept on the application forms, there is, you can text into a box, and there are Word versions. Actually, sorry, I think the application form itself, if you need that in a different format, we can provide that for you. And once we know that we've provided that for you, we will accept it in that format as a submitted application. The video responses, just to recap, you can provide a video response to the questions, the merit and impact questions, if you are requesting funding for less than $20,000. If your funding request from Create New South Wales is above $20,000, you won't have that option. You will only be able to provide text responses. Just going through the chat there, are there any other questions that have come up from people?
There's a question from Raymond there. This is Joe from Accessible Arts, but I also have a question, if I may.
Yeah, go for it.
I noticed that this category is for individuals and groups, and I wondered is there ever a bit of a grey area between groups and organisations? Do you have a definition of what a group is, for instance?
A group is sort of more of an informal, like collective of people. Like an organisation is an incorporated body, if you like. So it has a formalised structure, whereas a group can be a group of people who might be operating under an ABN, which is sort of a collective of people or a sort of informal partnership, or and you might have a name, like it might be a kind of a theatre group that kind of operate under a sort of creative name. So, for instance, I have one where I have an ABN for the Society of Histrionic Happenings, and that's where I make my theatre work under that. So that's actually a sole trader one though. So I'm still an individual, but you might actually use that as an umbrella term for a group of you working together to put on theatre or to put an exhibition together or yeah, any kind of sort of creative project, you can actually move between individual or group. But an organisation is a formalised entity.
Thanks. And I suppose like a band of musicians or something along those lines, does that create any trickiness when it comes to, you know, that ideal scenario when the application is successful and payment? Are you able to pay a group, or do you need an individual to take responsibility for that?
Yes, no, so that's a very good question. So an individual will have to take responsibility for that if there isn't a kind of group, like they might have established a bank account, but there still will have to be someone who takes responsibility for it. You can, however, have your application auspiced. That means that you can request an organisation to receive the funds on your behalf, and that way that sort of responsibility is taken away from you.
Great.
Does that answer your question? Yep.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Or comments even, like is there anything that you kind of, just in terms of hearing about the what's on offer, are there any sort of thoughts about what Create New South Wales has on offer, or any queries about what's on offer?
There's a few questions there in the chat, Anne-Louise.
Oh, there's more. Sorry. Thank you. Yes. Oh, what sort of disability do you consider as disability? I think disability is not an eligibility requirement. There are, I suppose, sort of how you identify is up to you, and there is a kind of question in there, I think, relating to that, but that's not actually, that doesn't have anything to do with how your project is assessed, except to sort of go, well, we would like to be supporting people with disability to make work and to be creative and achieve their projects and their ideas. So it's more of a sort of sense of being aware of who is applying. So disability is really a self-identifying thing. It's not something that Create New South Wales has a kind of, there is a definition that you can access. I'm sorry, I don't have it to hand at the moment. That sort of talks to that, I think, in our glossary and also in our funding guidelines. But it's not an eligibility requirement at any point in these funding rounds. Can funding be applied for under creative Koori or disability if not all members of the group are Koori or have a disability? I might throw that question to Tammy. Do you feel like answering a question there, Tammy?
Or disability if not all members of the group are Koori or have a disability. Yeah, creative Koori can cover Aboriginal applicants with disability. I'm kind of getting a bit confused there with the creative Koori or disability. Not all members of the group are Koori or have a disability. No, not all members. I mean, there's no distinction on disability and what type of disability can apply. Within each round, we encourage everyone to apply. It's really about how fantastic your project idea and how you sell that project. And if it includes yourself as an artist with disability, please mention that. And please, if it's about, your reach as an artist with disability in the art form, we want to hear how your art form, impacts on the project. So there's, again, there's not really it's a really good question though, don't you think, AL? That we're
it's not. I think
from
a couple of times now. I think maybe just by setting up a webinar that's here to support the disability sector, it's not to say that there is disability funding per se. So it's just really just targeting, so you have your own, like a webinar that you feel like you have access to ask questions specific to you. So it's not there isn't disability funding that we're talking about here. Does that answer the question? I hope so.
Maybe that's a thought to think about.
Yeah, exactly. So just to the question around filming, there is a different category for filming, and we can put that in the chat too. It's Screen New South Wales, which is also part of Create New South Wales. They have their own funding opportunities. So we'll pop that in the chat. When you say the Minister's eligibility assessment guideline and policy, I wouldn't mind just a bit of clarity about what you mean by that, Raymond. That would be good. And just moving on to your other question, I'm a songwriter and filmmaker. I do create music and make musical videos to tell the story and publish my work. It looks like the music creation component fits well with your criteria, but the filming does not. Where do I fit in this situation? That's a really good question, because I think when it comes to music videos and why a music video is being created, that kind of is slightly different to filmmaking. So filmmaking, we're sort of talking about narrative storytelling through film. Because often, like music, you might have you want to create a video for your song. Often in the visual arts sector, we have visual artists who work across different formats, and that includes video. In those situations, that's not filmmaking in the same way, because I would look at, say, creating a video to promote your song is part and parcel of the song making. So it's not, that wouldn't be ineligible. I'm pretty sure about that. Just if anyone's listening from Create who wants to challenge that, let me know. But I'm pretty sure that's how we would look at a music video. It's very different to a film, if you like. If I want to create, this is a question from Eugenie. If I want to create performance work that invites participants to be a part of the artwork, which art form does this belong? Visual arts or multi-arts? If it's a performance work, it's up to you where you, I assume when you're saying which art form, it's about which art form board you would like to assess the application. If it's a performance work, you could look at it. If it's theatre and musical theatre space, you could look at that. If it's something where you feel like it doesn't really feel like a theatre work, multi-arts tends to be the space into which that sort of project could fit. If it's sort of combining lots of different sort of forms, if you like. So yeah, I think it's up to you. I mean, just sort of have a think about what sort of space you normally practice in, and how you would perhaps define yourself as an artist, and how would you define your practice, and then maybe that's where you would seek to put your application. Question from Bonnie. Can you apply to make recordings of live performance accessible, such as to pay for captioning and audio describing? Yes, you could, definitely. I think that's a really great question, specifically to talk to sort of audience impact as well. Like if you're making work and you want it to be seen by as many people as possible, and by making it accessible, I think is a really great way to broaden your audience impact. So that's yes, you can apply for that sort of support. So just Raymond has clarified his question around the minister's guidelines. I meant there should be some sort of guidance from the minister on how to apply the law in assessing applications for funding. I'm still unclear. I suppose all I can say, Raymond, is that the minister, in developing the guidelines, they have been written by staff based on what the minister has sort of directed in terms of what he wants to provide to the sector generally. Then they're sort of written internally with the expertise of staff internally, and then they're they're sent to the minister for his approval. So basically the guidelines are the minister's document, really, and he has approved those. So in terms of then how that process is assessed is similar. He has approved the artform boards, so he has, in a sense, set them up, if you like, and he approves the artform board members. He approves the recommendations from those artform boards. So at each stage of the process of applying for funding or even establishing the guidelines in the first instance, the minister, has approval over all those stages. So I'm hoping that sort of answers your question. So a question from Jeremy. Following Raymond's question, is a video filmmaking aspect in a theatre-based piece eligible, and what category would this fit in? This show is primarily theatre-based. Well, Jeremy, yeah, I think you probably answered your own question there. I think if it's a theatre work and which has sort of, again, that sort of multi-arts aspect to it, like, you have, as part of the performance, you have a projection of a video created. That is not filmmaking. I think that's something that's supporting the storytelling, the narrative storytelling within a theatrical context. If you were to say make a film and take that out and film it in a cinema and present it in a cinema, that's very different. That's sort of filmmaking. It's so I think that would be eligible, yes, if you're wanting to get funding to make a sort of aspect of the work, a video aspect of the theatre work, yes. The minister's documents, are they publicly available? Again, I'm not 100% sure which documents you're referring to, but as I said, the minister approves all the information that is on our website. So anything that has a kind of reference to the rationale behind the guidelines. There's, in the guidelines themselves, there's a message from the minister, which I suppose contextualises his rationale for the funding for the coming year. So that's always worth a read. So yeah, and actually on the Create New South Wales website, there are lots of media releases that sort of talk to what the minister has approved or whether what the government is doing with regards to the arts and funding development, arts and development funding, sorry. So all those things are available, yeah. And if you really do want to get into sort of, I suppose, the political side of things and sort of understand more where they're coming from, a lot of information is also on the New South Wales State Government website. So if you really want to sort of drill down and sort of learn more about that, that's also available there. A question from Daniel. Do you accept works of audio such as podcasts or scripted audio storytelling? Yes, we do. I think that falls within the arts and cultural funding remit. Again, I think it would be perhaps a challenge to think about which art form board you would like to assess that, because sometimes it might be a more literary podcast. If it's a sort of storytelling podcast, it could fit into the theatrical space. Yeah, it just, again, depends on what the sort of main thrust of the work is. Really good questions, everybody. Keeping me on my toes. So going back to the music video, about the music video, what happens, it's just not a video of where the performer is not only singing, but there is also storytelling through visualization along with singing. Yeah, I think that does fit into the same explanation, because I think at the end of the day, Raymond, I think the primary focus of the work is the music and the musician. And it's not, again, if you think about filmmaking as a thing of, could that video go and be screened at a film festival, or could you go and watch it in the cinema, or think of it like that. And if you feel like, yes, you could, then it feels more like a film, a short film, albeit. But if it's primarily to support the work of a musician or a band, then I think it fits within the scope of arts and cultural funding. Good question. Is there someone within Accessible Arts or Create New South Wales to consult about COVID protocols within a project and project delivery? Yeah, I mean, again, that's something you can always check in with either Accessible Arts or Create. Most of the protocols relating to this sort of thing are actually also available on the state government website. And we can, often we will probably point you in that direction first, just to sort of have a look at what they say, because all we're doing often is just is sort of relaying that information ourselves. So that's the best place to go. But yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to always ask us. Raymond, which legislation actually are these fundings approved under? That's a really good question, and I don't know. I can't answer that. I don't know what legislation it's approved under. But if you really want to know, we can find out and let you know. There will be some kind of formal, I suppose, state government rationale for it, but I don't know that off the top of my head, sorry. Wow, I think that's taken us to the full hour. So I'd just like to go to the final, I think we might leave it there unless there's any burning questions left, and we might go to the final slide, Kartika. Oh, it's not quite the final slide, sorry. Okay, so on this slide, this is our contact us slide. So just a reminder again that we have more webinars this week. After this webinar, you will also be receiving a link to enable you to book in a lab session with one of I could Create New South Wales staff member, just to sort of talk through your specific project in more detail if you like. So you will receive that link and feel free to book in with one of us. Alternatively, you can call us on the phone number that's there, 02 8289 6520, or email us on arts.funding@create.nsw.gov.au. I also highly recommend that you follow Create New South Wales on Facebook, on Instagram and Twitter. Sign up to the e-news through the website as well, and that means that you'll get regular updates on opportunities available. And the final slide, thank you, Kartika. Oh, and I don't know. And finally, just to say thank you, everyone, for joining us today and listening and asking those really great questions in there. Thank you very much. Don't hesitate to be in contact. And yeah, good luck with your applications. Good luck. Power to you. And I think we'll end it there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anne-Louise.